Here we go, Kinesiology 223, Chapter 10, Book Presentation 5. I'm going to start getting into it because this is a pretty beefy presentation and I want to get this done because this is the last one. So the book talks about the factors that affect leader behavior. They talk about age, maturity, gender, nationality, type of sport, and psychological characteristics. I would urge you to look at this from the perspective of the athletes to the coach, but also the coach to the athlete. And they note that as people get older and they mature athletically, they increasingly prefer coaches who are more autocratic and socially supportive. More mature athletes typically more serious in their sport, and they view it as an autocratic enterprise. I would also make the suggestion that as your coach matures and it gets older, they have seen more reps, they've been to more practices, they've had more exposure with their athletes, so as a result they have a greater body of work to draw from. And so they too have the concept of age and maturity built into the process of how effective they are as a coach. Now a coach may be older, perhaps has more reps, more experience, and maybe they're more autocratic, and they're coaching a bunch of kids. So the group that is in front of the coach also matters. You could have a bunch of youth football players or college football players, and those two buckets of populations will require a slightly different style. And depending upon the age and maturity of a coach, that can be counterintuitive. Just saying, when you look at this, look at it from the prism of the athlete and also from the perspective of the coach. So with that, they also talk about gender. Male athletes prefer training and behaviors that are more autocratic in style than females do, and I would push back on this and say maybe some do, maybe some don't. I've met plenty of female athletes who are driven and prefer one style, whereas I've met plenty of male athletes who are driven and prefer a driven style of coaching. So I think it just depends on the body that's in front of me. It doesn't really matter regarding the rapper. If we go into nationality, they reference how the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, athletes prefer a certain coaching style, whereas Japanese university athletes prefer a different coaching style. And I would look no further than the cultural differences and norms that are seen within each country and how Japanese culture differs from the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, and that spills over into the athletic realm. Type of sport, whether it is a sport that's a team sport where it's interactive, like basketball, volleyball, or soccer, they state that that type of sport, meaning interactive, prefers more of an autocratic coaching style, and I think that one's on a quiz question somewhere, a test question somewhere. But it's different when you start talking about more individual, and when you have individual sports, it becomes a little bit different. But what's interesting about this is the book notes that in interactive team sports, they prefer an autocratic coaching style more than athletes in co-acting sports, such as bowling, swimming, or tennis. Thus, a volleyball team would typically prefer an autocratic coach than a track team. And if you think about what's going on in terms of when you have a team of people, you have to be able to implement in not only technique, etc., but you have to implement in strategy. And sometimes strategy is a little bit different animal when you start talking about track athletes or bowling or maybe even golf. And that's where your differentiation comes into place. They then jump into psychological characteristics, and they talk about this in terms of you have these different coaching behaviors, and different athletes will prefer one type of coach versus another if they have a higher internal locus of control or a lower internal locus of control. And when you have people have more of an external locus of control, they prefer an autocratic style. And I would say this is something where I've talked about where if you're a coach that goes into a program, let's just say the coach before you had a number of athletes and that coach espoused more of an extrinsic kind of extrinsic behavioral or extrinsic motivator, and the athletes have more of an external locus of control. And here you come in and you're trying to foster more of an internal locus of control and more internal drivers in terms of their behavior. you're going to run into some problems, right? Because it's going to be a challenge to reach those athletes as much as you think you can and want to. You have a team of people, an entire program who are wired one way because they are recruited in to match and align with the coaching style that was there. And now the new coaching style that is there is different. Stuff to think about, right? When you start looking at coaching jobs. So for optimal performance and satisfaction, there must be a capable coach whose leadership style matches the group preferences. And getting back to what I just mentioned, you go in, you take over a program, and all the preferences match the previous coach. And here you come in as a change agent and you're changing everything. It could be catastrophic. I mean, you have to understand what you're getting yourself into. The research that they show here propose that there are a couple guidelines. Satisfaction being one, cohesion being another, performance and intrinsic motivation. So when coaches report having developed the same decision style that their athletes prefer, meaning they're in alignment, right? Your coaches, your athletes have a certain expectation and what their perceived behaviors will be of the coach, and then the coach has an actual behavior style that matches that, your athletes will end up being much happier and there'll be greater cohesion. Now, getting into cohesion itself, let's get into here. Coaches have shown that coaches perceived as high in training and instruction, positive feedback behaviors, and democratic social support, and low in autocratic behavior had teams that were more cohesive. Now, this has been across different age groups, different sports types, different genders, and it can be generalized. And I would say whether it's, you're in a sport or you go to work for UPS, whatever it is, understand that you're searching for this cohesiveness that comes from these different traits that are listed up here. So I would urge you to kind of like wrap yourself around those and give them a big hug, because those are the things that'll carry you forward in terms of teamwork. When I talk about this in exercise leaders, I think this is great because they kind of go from the sports side to the exercise side. And they're talking about exercise leaders who have exhibited more task-related behaviors and provided task-specific reinforcement were associated with more cohesive exercise groups. A little bit different, right? Just a little bit different up here versus down here. But also the population is a little bit different when you talk a sport versus an exercise class. Then they get into performance. Most research supports the notion that specific coaching behaviors are related to increases in performance. And then this gets back to the conversation of the preferred coaching behaviors that the athletes want, and the coach comes in and aligns with those. Those are congruent. That's what you want. That will give you probably one of the greatest amounts of cohesion in a group, because your athletes will be very happy with the environment. They'll be highly satisfied. They'll have a voice. And what they found was, one study indicated that frequent social support behaviors related to poor team performance, the increased social support did not cause the team to lose more. More likely, the results suggest that losing teams need more social support from leaders to sustain motivation. What they're trying to encapsulate here is kind of like you have this preferred coaching behavior, and then you have the actual coaching behavior. And what I think they're trying to suggest here is that you have this increased social support, but the team continued to lose. And what they're really looking at was that there was an incongruent relationship between the two. They don't really define it all that well here, and this last sentence is actually quite confusing. The big takeaway that I want you to have with this is, when the behaviors are congruent, the preferred and the actual behavior, the preferred of the athletes and the actual behavior of the coach, that's a very powerful situation where you have the athletes now are very satisfied with that coach and are very happy to be on that team, and they'll have greater cohesion. They talk about intrinsic motivation, and it's the concept that you have various coaching behaviors or styles with changes in intrinsic motivation is growing. So there's more and more literature, although some of it's stale, right? It's kind of legacy now at this point, because that's from 2002. I know there's more relevant conversation. Perhaps you can go on Google Scholar and look up some of these on your leisure, at your leisure. But really, they're showing that different styles of coaching, right? They're talking about autocratic style. had athletes with lower levels of intrinsic motivation and perceived competence than did coaches who exhibited a more democratic leadership style. So what they're really getting at is looking at autocratic versus democratic and being able to foster kind of this intrinsic motivation that you want in your athletes. So it's interesting, and I say it all the time, coaches create the climate, the coaches create the culture. And so here you are looking at what could be the consequences of your leadership and your leadership culture. What you're really trying to find is athletes and put in place athletes who have great satisfaction, high cohesion, who have the ability to perform at a higher level because there is a congruent relationship between what their expectations are versus what you deliver. And then you have higher intrinsic motivation as well. It's been a theme we've had through a lot of these presentations. So proactive training can include developing leadership skills. You go to seminars, clinics, read books. Importance of experiential learning and meaningful responsibilities. And the importance to have here of experiential learning is you want to have your student athletes have leadership roles and learn how to lead. And then what they show down here is you have coaches can learn to kind of enhance the leadership skills of their captains. But again, I said it earlier, you have to set expectations on what you're trying to accomplish within those leadership roles. Set those expectations, make sure you articulate them and what that vision is for your captains on your team. And then from there, you can work with your student athletes or your captains to help enhance their leadership skills and capabilities to become more effective. It just takes time and practice. So this transformational theory, you have four components that are leaders. Four components: leader qualities, leader style, followers qualities, and situational factors. Excuse me. So this theory suggests that leaders must be strong role models who demonstrate key group values, above average ability, not really specified in the book, their intelligence, though I would suggest that with this, it could be generalized intelligence, but I think it needs to be situational, especially for a sport and situationally for a particular activity within a sport. They need to be optimistic, intrinsically motivated, and need to have empathy for others. So if we take this and go ahead and break this out, the leader's qualities are things that you find that are exceptional in terms of their ability to think better, to be able to function better, to really have kind of like a task intelligence or a sports intelligence, and be able to carry this optimistic tone even when you have things going poorly. And they're intrinsically motivated to do better. So let's jump over to this. With leadership styles, on the leadership styles, they can be autocratic, can be democratic. I think it's going to be a combination therein. Style of coaching is determined by the population and their experience, but also the coach's experience. And the style of the leader, that can change specific to whether it's teaching of a skill, could be teaching of technique, could be teaching of strategy, could also be specific throughout the season. You're building upon skill sets as you go through a season. And then for style, you have to have some degree of flexibility when you're working with your athletes to be able to integrate in things as you see fit. So if we go ahead and push this off to the side, so we're still in the same quadrant over there to the right. We talked about autocratic style, autocratic consultative, etc. With autocratic style, coach solves problems by themselves. They want no input. Autocratic consultative, coach obtains information, then solves problems by themselves. Consultative individual, the coach consults with the players and then makes decisions with or without input. Excuse me. Consultative group, the coach consults players in a group, then makes a decision that may or may not utilize input. Then with group style, the coach shares the problem with the players and the players make their own decisions. So I just want to highlight this because the book kind of points out these decision-making strategies that you see. When you get into situational factors, a leader, should be sensitive to the specific situation and environment. They need to consider several situational factors: team sport, individual sport, interactive, coactive, size of a team, group size, etc. And how it changes as the group gets bigger, and how much time is available, right? So this is definitely stuff you have to dig into. With the followers' qualities, which is on the bottom down here, it's important to determine the effectiveness of a leader so you have this matching of outcomes. And it's this mesh point between the two, between the leader and the followers, that really defines how the results are. So with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off right here. Thank you so much.